Hello, this video is going to be about AG-Grid, React and column state. To help, we're going to use this application here. We've got row data for the grid, we've got column definitions for the grid, we're loading data from the server, and here is the grid component definition. I am using the React hook useState here for column definitions, which is what most AG-Grid React applications will use for the column definitions. However, for this video sample application, I'm going to use the useMemo hook. This is because I'll be doing a lot of column definition changes and the code will be easier to understand if we use useMemo. In your app, you can use useState or useMemo. It's up to you. So here is our useMemo. It's just returning back a list of columns and it's got 0 dependencies, which means the columns won't change for the lifetime of this application. Okay, let the fun begin. I'm going to introduce a state item called include medals, and then I'll return back a different set of column definitions based on whether include medals is true or false. I do type fast, so let me go through this here again. Here is the state item for include medals. My memo uses include medals as a dependency. Then it'll return back either this set of column definitions or this set of column definitions based on the value of include medals. I toggle the value of include medals using this callback here, which is tied to a button that I've set down here. And then lastly, I've also configured the default column definition to set the default column width to 100 so we can see more columns on our screen. The running application here is including the medal columns gold, silver, bronze and total until I click toggle medals. Now they're gone. So let me click, click again, click, click again. So in your application, if you want to change the columns that are inside the grid, update the column definitions. I'll now code up including medals a slightly different way. Instead of returning back a different set of column defs, I'll use the hide attribute on the column def for the medal columns. And I'll take year, date and sport out. There's too many columns for this example. So again, we're using useMemo. It returns back a new set of column definitions each time it's called. It's got a dependency on include medals, and then it uses include medals to specify whether each medal column is hidden or not. And our example will behave exactly as it did before, where the gold, silver and bronze are showing in hiding based toggle medals. So if you want to hide a column, you can just toggle the hide attribute rather than removing the column from your column definitions. Let's demonstrate changing something else. I'm going to introduce another state item that will toggle whether the age and athlete columns use uppercase for their headers. Here is the state item cap headers. It's a dependency on my useMemo, and then it's used inside here to decide whether the header name will be capitalized or not for the age and the athlete columns. In our demo, clicking the toggle headers will toggle capitals in the age and athlete column. Cool. I want to look more closely at column width, so I'm going to take the width off the default call def and set it explicitly on the athlete and age columns. I'm also going to make all columns resizable by setting that in the default call def. Now let me demonstrate a problem that this introduces. Let me assume the user interacts with your grid and increases the width of the athlete column. Then the application toggles headers, and you will see there that the width of the column is reset back to 100 pixels. Let's watch that again. I will increase the width of the athlete column, click toggle headers, and the column is reset back to 100 pixels. So every time the column definitions are set, width 100 pixels is being applied. If we do not want width to be applied every time the column definitions are set, then rather than using width, we should use initial width. Now in our example, I'm going to increase the width of the athlete column and the width of the age column. And when I click toggle headers, you'll see that age resets back to its initial width, but not athlete. There, so age has now gone back to 100, but athlete has not. Again, I'll stretch athlete to be bigger, toggle headers, age has gone smaller again, athlete has not. And that's because athlete is using initial width. It is only set the first time the column is created. Age is using width. That's used every time we set the column definitions. I want to show you a little gotcha. I'm going to set initial width on both athlete and age, and I'm going to introduce a value getter onto the athlete column instead of using field. Now I'll go test this, and I'll increase the width of the athlete column and increase the width of the age column. And I'm about to hit toggle headers. Before I do, remember initial width is being used for both age and athlete. That means that when I hit toggle headers, it shouldn't reset to width. 1, 2, 3, hit. Oh no, athlete went back to 100 pixels wide. Why did that happen? I'm using initial width. It should only set it to 100 when the column is being created for the first time. The reason why this happened is because the grid uses the column ID to match the new set of columns with the previous set of columns. If you watched my video on columns, you will know that the grid will try and use the field as the ID. But here, I'm not using the field. I'm providing a value getter. that means the grid will create an ID, and that's not really deterministic. So every time the columns get set, this athlete column is getting a new ID because I'm using value getter and not field. Because the ID is different every time, the grid doesn't know it's the same column, and therefore the column state is lost. But we can solve that easily by just explicitly providing a col ID. Now with the col ID set, when we set the new column defs, the grid will know that this column is the same as the column we had before. So when we increase the width of the athlete column, and let's increase the width of the age column, and then click on toggle headers, there, the widths of the columns were maintained. So the lesson is, if you're updating column definitions, if you're using a value getter, make sure you provide a col ID, otherwise the grid won't know how to match the columns. Right, let's set the code back. I've got something important to say about width and initial width. We need both width and initial width because the column width is state that the grid manages. Column width is something that the grid can change because the user can resize a column using the grid's UI. Unless you turn off column resizing in the grid, the actual column width is controlled by the grid, not the application. It is grid managed state. To see all of the column state attributes, go to your documentation, and inside the column section, go to updating definitions, and you will see this table here. These are all of the column state attributes. Width we've already seen in this video. Flex is columns that are using flex to decide their width. Hide is the visibility of a column. Pinned is whether a column is pinned. Sort and sort index are to do with column sorting. Row group and row group index are to do with row grouping. Pivot and pivot index are to do with pivoting, and agfunc is to do with aggregation. There are 3 ways your application can update column state. The first is updating column definitions, the second is using the column state API, and the third is using specific column APIs. We're currently looking at updating column definitions, and we'll continue to do that for the next few minutes. After that, in this video, we're going to look at updating using the column state API, and then lastly we'll look at the specific column APIs, and at the very end we'll then do a comparison of each. Right, let's get our hands more dirty by updating state using column definitions. I want to show you the difference between null and undefined with regards column state items in the column definitions. So to demonstrate, I'll code up some buttons to set the pinned value of the age column to either left, right, null, or undefined. Okay, so here is my state item for age pinned. Age pinned has been used then here for the pinned value for the age column. And again, age pinned is used as a dependency for this useMemo. Then down here, I've got my new 4 buttons where I've got left, right, null, and undefined, and it's setting set age pinned for each one of those values. Okay, let's demo. If I click on left, the age column is pinned to the left, as you'd probably expect. If I click on right, the age column is pinned to the right. If I click on null, the pinning is cleared. That's all probably making sense. Now let's do that again, but instead of clicking null, I'm going to click on undefined. So left, it's pinned to the left, right, it's pinned to the right, and then undefined, nothing happens. The pinned is not updated if it's undefined. So there's a difference between null and undefined. The difference is null for a column state item means clear it. Undefined for a column state item means don't touch it. Null means clear it, undefined means don't touch it. Okay, let's do something else. I'm going to refresh the demo and I'm going to pin athlete by dragging the mouse. So now the user is interacted with the grid and it's set athlete to be pinned to the left hand side. If I then pin age by clicking on left here, now both age and athlete are pinned. A new set of column definitions were provided. Athlete doesn't have any pinning here. That means the value is undefined. So we didn't change the state of the athlete pinned value. Only age was set. Then if I set age to null, age will no longer be pinned, but athlete will stay pinned. Again, because athlete's pinned is undefined, it doesn't get updated as new column definitions are changed. To clear pinned, you must set it to null. In our example code there, we were playing with width, we also played with some pinned, looked at the value versus the initial value, and we also looked at the difference between undefined and null. Everything we went through applies equally to all of the other values here. So I won't go into these other values individually. If you want to see them for yourself, just write some sample code for yourself, but you should see the same behavior. Instead, I'm going to skip on and go on to the next topic, which is column order. Let me show you what happens by default to the column order if we don't do anything. If I move column into the second position here, and then choose toggle medals, you'll see athlete jumps back to the start. I'll do that again. I'll move column to the second position and then click, and athlete moves back to the start. So the question is, when you set column definitions, do you want the order in your column definitions to be used, which is happening here, or do you not want to touch the column order? If you don't want the column order to be changed when you set column definitions, then set the property maintain column order to true. So here maintain column order is set to true, it's a grid property. Now if I move athlete to the second position and then toggle medals, athlete stays in the second position. Let's move to the third position and toggle medals, athlete stays in the third position. Okay, remember I said there was 3 ways for updating state we were going to talk about. First is column definitions. Well, I'm now finished talking about column definitions. I'm going to move on to the column state API. And to show you this, I'm going to write some code. While this code is being written, allow me to take this moment to say, well done for choosing to learn AGGrid. You're obviously a very smart person. AGGrid is the best JavaScript data grid in the world. So the code here, I've got saved call state, which is a React use ref. Then that's used down here in these 2 new buttons that I've implemented. The first saves the call state, it gets it using the column API, get column state, and it sets it to that ref item saved call state. The second method does the reverse. It will apply column state and take it from the saved call state item. In your app, you'd probably save call state in local storage or maybe on the server. This is a simple demo application, so I'm just using a React use ref. Okay, the console's open here, so I'll demo. Before I save the state, I'm going to change things around a bit. I'm going to make athlete smaller and I'm going to pin by the left athlete. Okay, now I'll click on save state. The result of get column state is now logged to the console. That's what this is here, so I can click onto it to inspect. It is an array of 7 items. Each item represents the stateful information for 1 column. Let me open up the first one, which is for the athlete. And I can see here that pinned is set to left because I've pinned by this column, and the width is 115. The default width for a column is 200. All of the state items that we saw in the docs are listed here. Now if I go out a bit, you can see here width is still 200 for all the other columns, pinned is null for all the other columns, and null is being used here, not undefined, so when we apply the state again, any pinning will be cleared that wasn't previously set. Right, I'm going to restore this now, but before I do, I'm going to change the state of the columns. So I'll take athlete out of the pinned section, and I'll make athlete wide again. Okay, so now when I restore, I should expect athlete to get repinned and resized. So you ready? 1, 2, 3, click. It didn't work. Okay, I paused recording and I checked the docs. The problem is here. This actually takes this. It's an object where state is passed in with the state attribute. Okay, let's see if this puppy flies. We'll make athlete smaller again and we'll pin it again. We'll hit save again. We can see that it's printed out and it's got width 119 and pinned is left. Right, let's unpin it. Let's make athlete bigger. So when I hit restore state, it should pin athlete again and make it narrow again. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3, click. Hallelujah. There, athlete's pinned and it's back narrow again.
So what we've seen here is getting the column state and then applying it back using apply column state. When you use apply column state, you don't have to use state that the grid gave you. You can create state yourself to set things explicitly. Let me show you. I'm now coding up a button to explicitly set the width of the athlete column to 100 pixels. This is the new callback. I'm calling apply column state and passing in this state object here. It's a list of 1 columns, the athlete column with width 100. When I then click on width 100, you'll notice that the athlete column will get narrow. The grid knew I was looking at the athlete column because that's the call ID that I passed in here. It matched this column up here, which was using the field for its ID. This method only impacts 1 column. Let's add more columns. I'm going to also get it to set the width of the age column, and we're going to set a sort on the gold column. Now when we click the first 2 columns, athlete and age will get resized, and then the gold column will get sorted. 1, 2, 3 and click. Athlete and age are now more narrow and gold is getting sorted. Some observations about what's being passed in here. We're passing in just 3 columns, and only those 3 columns are getting impacted. If you have more columns in the grid and they're not in this list, those other columns don't get touched. Similarly, you'll see that for each column we're only passing in a partial state. So for athlete we're only interested in the width attribute. All the other attributes are left blank. In other words, they're left as undefined, and undefined means the grid does not touch. If we wanted to clear an attribute, we would use null. So for example, for sort here, I'll now set that to null. We are now setting sort to null on the gold column. Back to our demo, I'll do a refresh and we'll click this button once to start off. I'll apply a sort on the gold. Now I'll click it again and you'll notice that the sort will be cleared. Cool. Now let's sort by 2 columns. I'll hold down shift and click country and then click gold. So now sorting by country and then gold. If I hit our button, see what happens. Gold is cleared, but country is not. That's because we're explicitly setting the sort to null for gold, but we haven't specified the country column in this at all, which means it's not touched. So what if we wanted to clear the attribute for all other columns? That's where the default state comes in. We are now telling the grid to do this for the athlete, age and gold columns and do this for all other columns. So in our example, let me just refresh and click this once. Okay, so now gold is being sorted. If I then click on country and press this button again, click, country was cleared of its sort and gold was sorted. In this method here, we're mixing up sorting and widths, which isn't really typical. Instead, we'll just get this method to now focus on widths. So this method is now saying set the width of the athlete column to 100 and the width of every other column to 200. If I go to my demo and click on the button, you can see width is made to 100 and the other columns are 200. Let me increase age here and country just to demo that those are actually changing. I click on the button and they go back to 200. I'll now code up a method for sorting. It'll sort first by gold and then by silver. This is my new method here. For the state, I'm passing in 2 columns, gold and silver, and I'm setting the sort to descending for each one. I'm also passing in a sort index. This is needed because they're sorting by more than 1 column, and the sort index tells the grid which order to apply the sorts. I'm also passing in a default state of sort null, which will clear sort on all other columns. Now on our demo, I will set it up by clicking on age to sort by age. Now when I click on sort gold silver, age is cleared and gold and silver are sorted. Perfect. You will notice that the default state for sort I set to be null and the default state I set for width I set to 200. I didn't use null here. That's because there's no such thing as no width. You can't remove the width and say this column has no width. Every column needs a width. That's why we specify a number here. So setting null for width doesn't work. For every other attribute, you would use null because it does make sense to take that attribute away. If we wanted the grid to respect the order of columns that we're passing in, we do that by setting apply order like this. I'll now hit our sort button on the demo and we can see the gold and silver are now the first 2 columns in the grid. So because apply order was specified here, the grid ordered the columns in this order here, and any columns that were not in this list were just added in at the end. It's not common to apply column order when you're specifying sorts, so let's take apply order out of here and I'm going to implement 2 new methods to explicitly set the order of the columns. I have implemented 2 new methods. This is the first one here. It'll put all of the medals in the first position. I can see here the list of columns has the medals first and I have apply order set to true. My second method will do similar except the medals are last and again apply order is true. Now in our demo, when I click on medals first, the medals come first. Medals last, medals come last. Medals first, medals come first. Medals last, you get the idea. So far with setting column state, we've looked at width and we've looked at sort and sort index. All of the other attributes work in the same way, so I won't be going into them individually. However, I want to show you one more example using row group. To do that, we will need AGGrid Enterprise. So I will npm install AGGrid Enterprise. A quick check to our package.json to make sure the version numbers are the same across Community, Enterprise and React for AGGrid. And finally, we'll import AGGrid Enterprise into our application. And I'll create one more method for updating the column state, this time demonstrating column row grouping. Here is my new method. Let me demo first and then go back and explain the method. Here's my new button. If I click on this, I can now see that the grid has been set to row group by country and then by athlete. And we're also getting aggregations on the gold, silver and bronze columns. And that's been achieved with applying this column state here. For the athlete and country column, we're setting the row group indexes. The row group index is set to 0 for country and 1 for athlete. That means the top level grouping will be country and the next level grouping will be athlete. We're not setting row group equal to true here. That's not needed because we're setting row group index that implies row group. We're also setting hide equal to true for both of these columns. Because we're showing athlete and country in the row grouping column, there's no need to show these columns after the row grouping column. And then finally, for the medal columns, we're setting an aggregation function of sum. That's what gives us the total values at the group levels here. Okie dokie. Right, so these are the three things I was going to go through. Column definitions we've gone through, setting column state we've gone through, and specific column APIs I'm going to go through now. Let me write some code. As this code's been written, I know you'd love to hear me sing a song. But I'm not going to do it because I don't feel like it. And because I don't feel like it, I'm not going to. Here's my new method. Let me demo first and explain the code again. Clicking on your new button, we can see that the grid will group again by country and then by athlete. And then we can also see aggregations on the gold, silver and bronze columns. This was achieved via calling the grid's column API. So firstly we set the row group columns to country and athlete, then we set visibility to false on country and athlete. Then we set the value columns to silver, bronze, gold and total. We set the aggregation function to each of these to sum. So this function here does pretty much the same as this function here. The difference is that this function up here uses different methods on the column API, whereas this function down here just sets the column state. To see what functions are available on the column API, go to the column API page in our documentation, and you'll see all of the functions listed for manipulating specific bits of the column state. We've gone through 3 ways of managing column state. All that's left for me to do is tell you which one you should use. Well, it's simple. Use this one, the column state API. For saving and restoring state, it's easier to work with the column state API than with the column definitions, because the column definitions have all that other column definition-y stuff in them, like header names and cell renderers, which makes things a bit confusing. Column definitions are best used for defining your columns, and then use the column state API for manipulating the state. Some die-hard React developers prefer using column definitions for managing column state because they can bind column definitions to React properties. This almost makes sense. However, remember that the grid manages its own internal state, and as such, this pattern doesn't fit very well. Lastly, the column API you shouldn't really use. Using the column state API is more powerful and lean with regard to your code. The only reason the column API methods for column state exist is for backwards compatibility. They were there first. And that, my dear friends, is the end of this video.